Self-concept and self-esteem. So, self-concept is one of the foundations of human relations. It operates on the premise that how a person perceives themselves is how they are going to communicate with other people, or it impacts very largely how they communicate with other people, and vice versa. How people perceive themselves actually affects how they communicate with us. Now, a person may not come up to you and say, I feel this way about myself. I think myself to be very smart. But how they communicate with you, you can probably have an idea if they think they're pretty smart or not. Similarly, somebody doesn't have to come up to you and say, I think I'm not that smart. Well, they may not have to tell you that, but particularly over communicating with them over time, you may get a sense of whether they think that or not. Again, how someone perceives themselves, very important in the way they communicate. Now, how a person feels in a particular way is not how they perceive themselves. Today I might feel lazy, or today I might feel very motivated. That's not generally self-concept. Self-concept is a general view that a person has about themselves on an ongoing basis, not how they just feel today. How you feel today is pretty much how you feel today. And later on, we're going to discuss a little bit more about self-esteem, and of course, your textbook gives us an extensive amount of information regarding self-esteem. You had a Bible text to read for this week, and your Bible text would have included Moses and a conversation with God. So let's recap very quickly because I'm sure by now you would have gotten a chance to go and check that Bible text. Hint, hint. Now, the Bible text deals with the fact that Moses was out there in the wilderness and he saw some bush burning and he went up to the bush. He was like, wow, how come is this bush burning? And then he went up and he said, wait, but it looks like it's burning. Well, at least I see a fire coming out of the bush, but it's not really burning. It just looks like I'm seeing flames. And so, pretty much as he got closer, God told Moses, Moses, stand up right there. You are approaching holy ground. And he said, if you want to go further, you got to take off your shoes. So he took off his shoes. All right, so then God says, I'm God, I'm speaking to you. You can't see me, but you can hear me. I'm speaking with you. And so God and Moses went into a conversation. So God told Moses, listen, I have some people in Egypt and I need you to go lead them out of Egypt. And in verse 11 of the text in Exodus 3, Moses said, Lord, me? Why me? I don't think I'm a good person to go to lead the children out of Israel. What makes you think I would want to go? And God says, don't worry yourself. I'll be with you. You can go. Then Moses is like, well, God, I don't know. When I go across to the people, what am I supposed to tell them? God said, tell them I am who I am and I am sent you. Moses is like, Lord, I don't know about that, God. I'm not too sure they will listen to anything I have to say. They're like, God, who is God? And how you knew God spoke to you? I mean, really? Lord, they wouldn't listen to me. And so God says, all right, listen. You're going to do these signs, and these signs are going to help in them understanding about me. All right, now in the caption on your slides, I skipped out on your text. I skipped out a couple of verses. That was intentional, just for us to focus the story where you want to focus it. So later on, we catch up the story in Exodus chapter 4, verse 8 to 9. And God told Moses, if they don't trust you after the first time, they don't take you seriously after the second time. But Moses is like, God. I have another problem. I have a couple problems with this whole idea anyway. But here's my next problem. Lord, listen, I don't talk well. I'm not good with words. And I stutter and I stammer. And God's like, Moses, you think I didn't know all of that when I chose you? I am God. Who you think made your mouth anywhere? I'm going to be with you right here. And Moses like, Lord, I hear what you're saying, but no, I really don't want to go, Lord. Send somebody else, please. Pick somebody to do the task, please. And then by this time in the story, the Bible says God got angry with Moses. And he said, you know what? Never mind. Never mind. Where's your brother? Yes, your brother Aaron. Yes, your brother Aaron speaks well. All right, fine. You tell him what I have to say, and okay, he will speak. All right? And however, I'll be right with you and him, right? But I'll use Aaron. Okay? He will act as your mouth, and you will do the signs. And it was very interesting, this story, that it maps out this idea of self-concept. How Moses perceived himself impacted how he communicated with God. His response to God was dependent on how he viewed himself in this particular matter. God says, Moses, I think you are quite capable to do the task. Moses is like, no, Lord, I am not capable. I don't see or view myself as being capable, so no, I can't do it. God said, okay, Moses, well, I'll give you certain powers and skill sets to do it. God, Moses, like, even after all of that, Lord, I still don't think I'm capable. God said, all right, Moses, no worry, okay, I would be there with you, God. I hear what you have to say, but I still don't think I'm capable. And this is a very interesting story. And at the bottom of the story, at the base of the story, is a very important point, which I need you to note, and I'm sure it's going to pop up in the quiz. One of the key points in this story as it relates to self-concept is the following. A person's self-concept is not easy to change. After God had a conversation with Moses, his concept of himself did not change. And that is very important. That's why this is such a foundation piece in human relations. How somebody perceives themselves, especially in their adult life, does not change easily. Many times we feel we can just have a conversation with somebody and tell them about how they view things and how they view themselves, and they will just change it tomorrow. No, it doesn't. Self-concept is very difficult to change. So it's very important that self-concept be formed right. But the truth is, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Where and how we form self-concept actually impacts largely how we go forward and communicate. So that's very important to note, and we'll get back to that in the future. Now, we had said in our earlier slides, our first set of slides actually, that this course has two major emphases, and your textbook talks about that. You have the personal development and growth side. So this part of the course, we will talk about what is inside an individual, how it affects their interrelations and communications, and later on we'll talk about from the organizational side and within the organization, how we can still achieve the objectives of an organization while improving human relation skill. So what is inside an individual affects how they communicate, and individual skills and abilities affects how they communicate. And this is, again, very important because sometimes I am an HR teacher, so I see a lot of resumes and people come to me for resumes for me to critique and for me to fine tune and for me to help them develop it. And sometimes you will see persons say, wow, I have excellent communication skills, or they will say on their resume, I have excellent interpersonal skills. And the truth of the matter is, very few people have excellent interpersonal skills, and very few people have excellent communication skills. The truth is, not that we don't know how to communicate and say words, a lot of us know how to talk. But many times when it comes to listening, we're not very good. When it comes to focus, we sometimes are not very good. Sometimes our emotions cloud the way we relate to others. Sometimes the view we have of others, the view we have of ourselves impact the way we communicate. And really and truly, when we start to peel down or when we really assess ourselves, we'll find that we're not that very excellent at communication skills. We can talk. We can probably express ourselves, which is what a lot of people mean. But when it comes to having healthy and effective human relation skills, that requires a little bit more intentional work. So again, we want to spend some time talking about that, and hopefully the first part of this course helps you also to assess yourself to see where you are in certain aspects of communication. I want to just put a plug in here that you have a case study due at the end of this week. I just put a slide here to remind you, yes, the case study at the end of chapter 2 is for you to be able to do. So I just put it there to remind you of that. If this was a face-to-face class, we may have gone through it in class together, but for online purposes, you have that to do for me, and you submit it at the end of the week. Now, how does a person's concept of themselves inform how they relate to others? This is an interesting question, and I expect that in a perusal of your text, that you're going to come up with some ideas. There's no specific section of the text that is going to deal with this particular question. So you have to pull information here and make sure you fill it in, of course. Just to make sure that you are going in the textbook to make sure that you are finding out this kind of information to put in here. I am going to put a question on the quiz regarding this question. Regarding this particular question here. That's very important. So I want you to actually answer that question for me. Again, there's no specific section in the chapter that relates to this question. You have to kind of pull the information out to answer the question. But think about it and then come up with some very important answers as it relates to this. How does a person's concept of themselves inform how they relate to others? So based on how somebody perceives themselves, they can communicate this way to others, or they can relate this way. If a person perceives themselves this way, they can communicate this way to others or relate this way to others. So I expect you to use some very specific information to do that. So I'm going to let you come with your 5 points for this particular slide. Self-concept, the way one sees oneself, your text talks about this. and the foundations of all the thoughts about oneself. All right, so the text goes ahead to define self-concept, and it's very often in our life to assess how we see ourselves. Actually, how we see ourselves could change over time. We can be educated, more information could come our way, we may have experienced new things, we came upon new knowledge, we changed the way we look at things, or we updated, or we grew, or we developed, and so we would find a lot of the times that we can actually, how we see ourselves can change over time. But it's important for us to explore how we feel and think about things. And of course, later on, when we go into self-awareness, we'll talk a little bit about how you view things. And of course, you'll have an assignment next week, actually, probably this week, Self, to be able to talk about how you're aware, how do you feel about certain things? What is your view about certain things? That is very interesting indeed. So I'm going to find out a little bit about how you see things. Now, your textbook has this diagram, and I expect you will fill it out. Very simple there. A nice little figure in your textbook so you can fill out the blank spaces. There are 4 parts of self-concept, and I expect that you will fill it out quite easily on those 4 lines, and you can write it on the slides or you can write it in your own personal notes. I expect that you will do just that. So these various views here is very interesting, the 4 of them. It's very interesting, and we're going to spend a little time talking about 1 or 2 of those because these are pretty much self-explanatory, and your book goes into quite a amount of details of these. Let's look at the ideal one. The way one would like to be or plans to become. What you wish you were really like. Our ideal selves. And we all have an ideal self. We all want to be able to look a particular way, speak a particular way, establish a particular career, have a certain type of life. You want to be a particular way. You want to probably be viewed a particular way. And that's important. All of us have our ideal selves that we're working towards. And then, of course, we have the others there, how we assume people look at us. That's very interesting. If you think people look at you a particular way, you may think, well, I think people look forward to hearing me when I communicate. That's why I communicate plenty when I communicate. Or you may think, people may not think I know a lot, therefore I'm not going to say much. And again, how we view, how we assume people look at us takes a lot of plays the way we actually communicate. And that's very interesting. Sometimes you walk along the mall and you look at people, or you go about your daily life, and you will probably look at how people look at you. Sometimes you see people that look at you, or they're always looking around. They're probably looking to see how people view them. Sometimes you see people dress a particular way, and probably they dress a particular way to draw attention to themselves. Maybe, maybe not. But again, how people assume people look at them affects the way they communicate. That is so true. And the more you get into interactions with human beings and you understand these things, it makes interaction even more interesting with human beings. It really is interesting. All right, and then we have the self-image, the view you have of yourself, and then also the way you are when nobody's around to approve or disapprove. Who you really are. You understand? Who you really are. What kind of person you are, what kind of habits you have. What's your real self? Who's the real you? And we get to see those a lot of times, and we feel happy to do those. Normally, if we have a healthy self-concept, or sometimes we hide some of our aspects from others, depending on how we think about ourselves. And that's very interesting indeed. So, your book talks about psychologist Carl Rogers, and Carl Rogers has some things to say himself, so I'll let you fill in what Carl Rogers actually says. It's there in your textbook. But he has something to say, so I'll let you fill in that blank cell. But I want to pay attention to the bottom of the slides. I really want to pay attention right here, where Carl Rogers talks about the fact that persons' real self and person's ideal self, many times there's a gap. But he is saying in order to have a healthy self-concept, you must bridge the gap between your real self and bridge the gap between your ideal self. And that's very interesting. And there are 3 suggestions he makes, and they're in your text. So one, he says, pay more attention to the messages one thinks about themselves, talks about that. Then he says, adjust your ideal self to fit more of reality. All right, so try not to be an individual, who thinks this ideal of yourself is too far out of reach, so eventually you will never reach it. All right, but you will set your standards high, of course. And he says, try and working to be more realistic. Try to be more realistic as much as possible. And that's very interesting. Who I want to be must be realistic, and who I am today, I must improve it. So let's bring and merge those ideas together as much as possible. That's what Carl Rogers will have suggested here. And I think it's actually pretty much a good point. He also says here, when your real self and your ideal self are very far away, people tend to feel depressed and unhappy. All right. So our ideal selves is a work in progress as well. We have views of ideal aspects of ourselves. Now, our ideal self is a whole picture, and then there are aspects of ourselves that we want to become better at, and so we're working towards them. But healthily working towards those aspects of ourselves that we want to get good at, Carl Rogers suggests that we keep working at them, all right, but have a realistic view of what you want to be. So, based on our opening story, we have said before that self-concept could only change over time. You can't change somebody's self-concept with a conversation. You're not going to have a talk with them and that solves the problem. How a person views themselves and how it impacts how they relate to others is not something that can be solved by one problem. You don't even solve it by threats. You can get somebody to change their behavior, but you may not get somebody to change how they perceive things. And that's very important. There's a difference between the two. Somebody's behavior could change, but somebody's concept may not change as easily. So it's difficult to tell an adult to stop looking at yourself like that or stop looking at others like that. Just as you saw in Moses. Moses was talking to God. God was talking to Moses. You would think God will help you change your self-concept in one conversation. Even God knows that human heart is a bit difficult. You can't change human beings overnight. Sometimes people pray, Lord, change me. Well, the change is not going to come in a whoops and a laps. Many times the changes in ourselves come with time. And anybody knows a little bit about Christianity, that would probably help explain why they say sanctification is a work of a lifetime, if you ever heard that statement before. Not because God is slow. But human beings, we are slow to make changes, especially when we interpret things and we have the way in which we go about things and our ideologies about things. It takes a while to change those things. It doesn't happen overnight, especially when we come entrenched in our ways as adults. All right, so self-concept could only change with time. It's not going to change by a conversation. It's probably not even going to change by the end of this course, but at least what we could do is create awareness, and so it could help us start thinking about the way we perceive things and others. Self-concept affects our ability to learn, just like you saw in the story with Moses. God was trying to tell Moses, yes, Moses, you could do better. Moses was like, no, Jesus, I don't think I can. And so a lot of times, if we don't perceive we can learn something, we actually close the opportunity of doors to learning in some ideas, depending on how we perceive ourselves. And other times, we open ourselves very much to learning if we perceive ourselves as capable and able to learn. All right, and then of course as well, we have affected by success and failure. If you fail at something and you're embarrassed for it, many times you tell yourself, "I'll never do that again." Self-concept. I don't think I'm capable enough to do that, and I don't believe I can. And vice versa as well, the same. And of course, affects management behaviors. Yes, we will find many bosses in the workplace, and for some of you, those of you who work and work among others, you'll actually be surprised at how people perceive themselves actually impacts how they treat others. So you may have a boss or supervisor at work, and you will find a lot of times that sometimes the way they treat you or the way they treat others reflects themselves. And we want to talk about that a little bit when we talk to John Bowlby's perception of others and perception of self. We're going to get a little bit more specific about that, and that's very true. All right, so also on your next slide, we will talk also about this question here about a healthy self-concept. It says here, means not allowing yourself to be a slave to other people's opinions, how people think of you, or what they think you should do, or what you should do. You're not a slave to it. So I have a question here for you to think about. Do you think that people who honestly don't care about what others think about them, do you find they're hard to get along with? And that can be taken in many ways. There's some people who don't care to hoot what other people think. So they're going to do what they're going to do anyway. Whatever, regardless of if you like it or don't like it, what you think about it or not. That can be in a positive way. And it can also be in a negative way. There's some people who don't care about other people. They'll just pretty much impose themselves on other people, whether you like it or not. And there are other people who, of course, they sometimes choose to be positive about themselves. So they're no longer very bothered by how other people think. They know how to carry about themselves, and they've already had an opinion about how they're going to deal with their lives and leave the lives of others. And so for a lot of times, it can actually turn out to be quite positive. And it's quite nice to deal with people who are comfortable within themselves and also respect other people as well. And sometimes we admire people like that. We do, and we are all seeking to be comfortable within ourselves. So we can feel healthy about our own selves and also healthy about others. Now, on your exercise number 1, which is posted on Moodle, you have a document that you need to fill in some information for. So I'm going to take a moment right here to talk about that document and the information I want you to write in. And the reason why I'm asking you to write it in is that it'll stick better. That's why I'm using this method. I give you the information, you take a moment and put pencil in the information or write it in or type it in if you so desire. That way it helps you get into your own learning and it helps you practice the information as well. Alright, so if you look at your document, you will see a grid, and that grid has 4 sections. And if you notice at the top of the grid it says views of self. Alright, this is by Mr. John Bowlby. And on the side, if you look at the right hand side of the document, you'll see views of others. So it's a grid. And so the grids have to match. You have positive and negative on the top, and you have positive and negative and positive on the side. And so we want to talk about how one views themselves and how one views others and how we expect them to be able to interrelate. So let's go with number 1. Number 1, next to it, you should write the word for me, secure. Secure. And under in that section, you will write the following information for me. So I expect you will come back to the slides and play them over for you to write them in. So under secure, that's if you have a positive view of yourself and a positive view of others. How do you view yourself and how are you tended to be viewed as a secure person? And how are you supposed to interact? So that's what we're going to write on the lines below. So a positive view of oneself and a positive view of others means you are secure. You are outgoing, that's what you were writing there for me. Outgoing, affectionate. So the person tends to be fair enough, they can handle conversations well. And not only with the people you're familiar with, very familiar with, and the people you are very good with. It means generally speaking, even if you go into a situation you're not too familiar with people, you still feel very secure because you have a positive view of yourself and a positive view of others. Of course, it can change otherwise, right? So outgoing, affectionate, able to handle challenges and disappointments without losing a sense of self. Able to handle challenges and disappointments without losing a sense of self. This is an individual, again, who is positively views themselves and who positively views others. They have a positive view for other people, right? So you view other people as, relatively nice, positive people, good people. You view them like that, and people tend to be secure. All right, let's go to number 2. Number 2, the words you write on the lines are anxious / ambivalent. Now, that particular portion of the grid means one has a negative view of themselves, but a positive view of others. Persons who tend to have negative views of themselves tend to be anxious people, ambivalent. Ambivalent means sometimes they're not clear. They're a little all over the place. Sometimes they're indecisive. They're up and down. They're not sure. They're nervous. They're worried. They're always worried about what other people think. Oh, suppose it work out. I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't do that. Yes. So let's see what happens for those persons. So you write this information at the bottom. This person is drawn to relationships with others, which is very interesting. So they feel good in the presence of others because they don't feel good by themselves. This person is also uneasy with closeness. So a lot of the time getting close to other people means you have to reveal aspects of yourself. And because you already have a negative view of yourself, it means that you don't want to get too close to people because you don't want them to have to deal with you. You don't want them to see the real you. And that's very interesting. And these are real issues that we face. Sometimes we face them in ourselves at different areas in our lives, and then also we see them in other people. So this person is a negative view of themselves and they are uneasy with closeness. Another aspect here I want you to write is they tend to be sort of moody. Some days they invite affection from others, other days they reject other people. And you'll find that they tend to be up and down, sometimes because they are unsettled within themselves. And so they have a negative view of themselves, generally speaking, and positive. Now, sometimes people who have negative views of themselves hide. They hide the information. And so they don't want you to think that they have a negative view. So what they'll do is kind of stay away from other people. They don't feel equal with other people. They feel less than other people. But the other people, they think, well, they are fine, but the problem is me. All right, and again, this can affect how people relate to us and how we relate to them. And the more we understand these things, we will start to say, oh, wow, that would make sense when I see people communicate. And this is a great example of what happened with Moses. Moses was like, God, you cool, but I have issues, right? So again, he was very anxious and didn't really want to go into it. He was very uneasy, very uneasy. All right, number three. Number three, the word is dismissive. So a dismissive person is, I have a positive view of myself, but everybody else is dumb. Everybody else is not cool. So that's a negative view of others. This person is very dismissive of others. They don't care. All right, so underneath in that box, you'll put, they treat people as unworthy, and they have a low regard for others and relationships. So this individual treats people like you are nobody. They scorn people. They act like I'm better than you because I have a good view of myself. Of course, I'm the good one here. Something is wrong with you. Nobody's as good as me. And they tend to have high disdain and scorn for other people. And so persons who have a positive view of themselves but a negative view of others tend to be very dismissive of people, scornful. Number four, fearful. Fearful is the word. This person has a negative view of others and a negative view of themselves. So we can write here, this person is apprehensive about relationships, fear that people don't love them and that they are not lovable, avoid others, and they feel highly insecure. Many times, more often than not, this individual may have gone through very painful experiences when they were younger, and so they learn very early not to trust people, or you can't trust people well. So they have a negative view of themselves because they don't think of themselves as worthy. And then they also have a negative view of others. They believe constantly throughout people are constantly trying to harm me. And you have met people like this where they constantly believe somebody's trying to harm them. You know, every situation they're very suspicious. And sometimes again this is caused by quite negative circumstances that may have been caused early on in somebody's life. And this is why it's so important, guys, that how you have been introduced to the world and the experiences we have had can really affect the way we think of ourselves and the way we think of others. And so this is what John Bowlby was saying here. He was exploring how people see themselves and how they see others affects the way they relate to others and the type of relationships they would have with other people. And this is very important. So you have all four, and I know you would have definitely viewed that. Great. So moving along, I just want to highlight the underlying portion on this slide, which is you'll find that knowing and taking care of the real you will be quite possible without threatening others the more we continue to think about how we view ourselves and the way we view other people, right? We will tend to have good relations and healthy relations with other persons. Moving on to self-esteem. So self-esteem now is your belief in yourself, the way you value yourself. You believe that you have capabilities, all right? Viewing yourself means how you see yourself. I see myself as relatively a good person, relatively capable. I know my views. But self-esteem again now plays a little bit more significance and value in yourself. How important you see yourself. How you believe in yourself. And it goes a little deeper too, because this slide here has some information which you will fill out from your text, the extent to which an individual believes in himself or herself. All right, so you will fill out this information, but look at the bottom of this slide and it talks about the cipher. How somebody thinks about themselves actually affects how they're going to succeed in life. Very rare people who have low self-esteem get to very high levels in life. Now, barring, there are some people who do. And sometimes people who tend to struggle with inner self issues and they come to be in higher positions in life, they don't treat people well. And I know, again, some of you have worked and you work with other people and they don't always treat people well. Now, someone who doesn't treat somebody well could be like the person we saw for John Bowlby's 4 dimensions, where that person could be dismissive. They could be very scornful and dismissive and don't care and look down on others. That person could also not treat people well. But you also have people who struggle with low self-esteem, and some of them actually do make it up in life, and many times they don't know how to treat people well. As a matter of fact, they don't even know how to relate to people, and you have had some people in the workplace like that, for those of you who work. As a matter of fact, I remember a student telling me some years ago, she was telling the class, while I taught this class face-to-face, that she worked in a particular ministry here in Trinidad and Tobago. And she had a boss that was always real aggressive. She was a lady. She was real aggressive with people. And she was the kind of person who will embarrass you in front of people. She'll get to you before you get to her. And she always want to make people feel bad. And people are like, what is her problem? Like, what's going on with her? What is your issue? And so that went on for a period of time, and people just really detested her a lot. And this particular boss, eventually they had a training session and they came in to do personality assessments, and this individual had to do a number of assessments, and they went through quite a lot of self-inventory and self-assessments. They had to relate certain things back to the group of persons, and it was very interesting that this particular boss, one day when it was her time to relate based on her self-assessments, she broke down and cried, and everybody's like, "What? What's this? She breaking down to cry?" And she actually admitted that she struggled with esteem, and but she wanted to keep it covered up. So instead of anybody discovering that she struggled with self-esteem, she will get to you first. So she will never let you ever make her feel bad. She'll make you feel bad first, and she will never let you make feel like she wasn't capable. She will always come at you first. And eventually she had to break down and talk about, coming up in her childhood, she had life very hard and tough, and people didn't necessarily think that she was good enough, and so she had to fight in life, and for the rest of her life she felt like she had to do that. And for the first time she was able to face that issue within herself. And so it's very interesting, again, people, this is serious, how people view themselves impact largely how they relate to other people. So where does self-esteem come from? Well, in other words, who helps us develop self-esteem? And we have 4 arrows here, or 4 lines, and each one of those represents something. So here's the first one: friends. Second one: parents. Third one: teachers. And the fourth one: important others. These people help to form how we feel about themselves. When they love us, they care about us, they positively reinforce us in terms of their statements and what they say to us. This is how we develop our sense of worth. Especially from when we are younger. As we get older, we continue to form the way we view ourselves based on what other people tell us, what we have seen, and what we see around us, and our general acceptance from others overall. Self-esteem, continuing, your book talks about this. There are 2 types of self-esteem, or 2 parts of self-esteem. And so we find here feelings either negative or positive about your self-worth, and also your confidence in your ability to solve problems, which is called self-efficacy. I will make a nice quiz question right there. Hint, hint. What is self-efficacy? One's confidence in one's abilities to deal with problems reasonably. And that's very important. So self-confidence, how I feel about myself, with people, with persons who I'm familiar with people I'm not familiar with, non-familiar settings in front of others, handling unknown situations, how I feel about my worth and my level of confidence. And so in reality, self-esteem tends to go on a spectrum from low to high, moderate in between, and all of us will grow in our self-esteem. Different things happen along the way to help us develop, grow, and actually enhance our self-esteem and our self-worth here as an individual, how you esteem yourself to have worth as an individual. And so human relation continues with suggesting that self-esteem can be how you see yourself, which is self-concept. So self-concept is a subpart of self-esteem, how you accept or reject yourself and assume others think about you. All right, all those have aspects, and that's why they are coined together, self-esteem and self-concept. All right, and now I want to just make a note on this slide here. How a person views themselves actually can affect how they feel. You ever heard somebody say, I have a headache for a long time, I don't know why? Or somebody say, I'm just in a mood and I don't know why. Or you'll find some cases where somebody actually probably has insomnia and they can't sleep and they don't know why. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean we know exactly why the person may be doing that. But you may find that a lot of times when they cannot trace it to anything physical happening, a lot of times what's going on in a person's mind is actually affecting them. And this is very interesting, that again, how somebody feels can affect how they feel physically, what's going on in their minds. And so that's why it's important to sometimes investigate. And a lot of times we have to take time to heal some of the broken parts of ourselves that would have occurred over time, so that we can continue to build in healthy self-esteem, and very important. And so somebody may feel very good or confident in certain areas of their life. So maybe I'm good at football. Yes, let's play. I'm on a football team. Let me go. But maybe outside of playing something like football, and I just use that as an example, sometimes the individual doesn't feel good. They don't feel they're capable, so they shy away. They don't want to attempt schoolwork, or they want to put out too much effort because they're afraid to fail. They don't think in their ability to handle issues and challenges. They doubt themselves. They don't feel capable. And so a lot of times, sometimes you'll find while somebody might be otherwise capable in 1 or 2 areas of their life, in other areas they fall back, they procrastinate, they don't want to put out effort because they don't feel themselves as worthy or feel themselves as capable to do that. So notice a person with low self-esteem tends to have little enthusiasm or commitment in certain things. All right, and then other facts about self-esteem, which I think you can read here, and the opposite, of course, has to do with people who have healthy self-esteem. They tend to be open and ready to new experiences. All right, they don't shy away from certain types of new experiences. They tend to try to handle and tackle problems the best way they can. They tend to be good employees, and less apt to negative behavior, and that's very important as well. Now, this one is not in your book, so I want to take a little time here to give you some information. So please take note of the following. How can somebody's self-esteem be lowered? A person's self-esteem could be lowered by failure, if they tried something and failed, failure and frustration. A person's self-esteem can also be lowered by personal defects. Number 2, let's say you have personal disabilities, that can lower self-esteem. Number 3, comparison, constantly being compared to other people. Comparison and competition. Sometimes you always find yourself being competing and you find yourself not measuring up. That can affect somebody's self-esteem. Constantly measuring yourself to an ideal versus measuring your progress or your understanding. So instead of saying, look, I've done better than the last time, our self-thoughts are, no, I'm not good because the ideal is this and I'm not this, so therefore I'm a bad person. Or sometimes you even measure people by that. They're supposed to be the ideal rather than saying, well, at least they did better than last week, or I've seen improvements. All right. Number 5, when somebody is forced to learn or perform, they can have lower self-esteem. Number 6, lack of human interaction. Sometimes you don't interact with people enough, stay by yourself a lot, so a lot of times you just go by what's in your head rather than what happens in terms of building social relationships. And also negative human interactions. Example, insults, condescending speech. All right, that's another one as well. Negative human interactions. All right, so we're moving quite along very quickly. And we have here the origins of self-esteem. And the origin of self-esteem here, talk about again how a child is regarded by a parent. And this is in your book. I took this figure right out of your book. And we have here a parent actually having unconditional positive regard or conditional positive regard for a child. Let's look at the next slide to see how one increases self-esteem and one decreases self-esteem. Alright, so here Mr. Carl Rogers is saying here that a child's self-esteem a lot of times from young is dependent on how they are shown care or love by their parents. Alright, so unconditional positive regard suggests that I accept an individual as worthy regardless of their behavior. Unconditional positive regard suggests that I accept a person only based on how they behave. Now, of course, this is not talking about condoning wrong behavior. It's just saying that a child mustn't be led to feel that they're not worthy if they've made mistakes. Now, that doesn't mean a child doesn't have to be disciplined or corrected or punished. But at the end of the discipline, at the end of the punishment, the child must feel as though they're cared for or they're loved. We're not talking about the fact that you are loved only if you, and if you don't, you are not loved. All right, and a lot of times this is something in the Caribbean where I think sometimes as parents, and we may be recipients of it, parents, sometimes you find that they use all the harsh words. I found that in the Caribbean when we speak to children, we use words like somebody's dumb, and they're full of crap, or they're stupid, ignorant, dotish, as you were saying in Trinidad. Don't know much about the Barbados culture, but I know that I've learned that they talk about cussing out, somebody cussing out someone. And a lot of times you find that in the Caribbean, we are very harsh with words when we speak, I find, personally. And sometimes as children, people absorb these things. And the way we talk to each other, people do it so vehemently, and we use such critical words of one another. A lot of times this affects persons' esteem. We must look at the words we say to one another. Now, it doesn't mean sometimes somebody may do a silly act or do something that is totally unacceptable. But sometimes we attack individuals and human beings, and we break down how they perceive themselves. I made a mistake, or I did something that was wrong, so I'm worthy to be disciplined or corrected or punished. And that's true, but it doesn't mean that I'm unlovable or I should not be loved. Love sometimes, we say in the Caribbean, tough love. So part of love is also correction. But we talk about the fact that somebody feels that they are not good enough as soon as they are. Alright, they did not perform a good behavior, and that good behavior may not be acceptable, and that has to be addressed. But the way we use words is very important. Sometimes even in jest, we call people stupid and dumb. Boy, you stupid or what? Or you dumb or what? And very interesting, we use words, and sometimes even in our humors we tend to be very harsh. And sometimes you wonder why sometimes people are afraid to go in new settings, or they're afraid to be able to take up new challenges, or sometimes you tell children, go up and do something. I don't want to go. They learn from early to feel embarrassed and shame, and they don't want to be able to do, because sometimes we make them feel that way. And so it's important for us, again, as parents and upcoming parents for the future, and maybe we have been recipients of these things, to think very carefully about how we treat as an individual. Yes, I may have to correct you. Yes, I may have to discipline you. But at the end of the day, you're still worthy as an individual. You can still come back to me, especially after you accept that your behavior is wrong and you're willing to make amends and correct it. You can come back to me. I still care about you. I still love you. The love doesn't change. However, I'll have to deal with the situation as it comes up. And that's very important in terms of how we treat people. And many times they have found that persons who come from homes that you were disciplined and corrected as needed. However, you will always know that you were valued. Those children tend to have better self-worth going through. All right, going through. All right, so how are self-esteem and self-concept connected? That's a question that I need you to answer for me, and you will find the answer based on the information we have covered in this chapter, in these slides, as well as when you read your textbook. So, there are strategies for dealing with persons with low self-esteem. I'm not too sure your book had that one. I think I'm probably putting that in there for you. So you can take a look at that. And also, we can find that sometimes people are very shy. They don't want to come out. Sometimes they just need a little encouragement. So sometimes the way we treat people, we give them time, try to be patient with them. Over time, they may encourage them to take a little bit more steps in building their self confidence. If you are in charge of people at work and you realize somebody's a little shy, or somebody may be struggling with feeling a sense of worth, it doesn't mean somebody is shy means that they have low self-esteem, not necessarily. But as a person, if you are in a position of leadership and some of you plan to own your own businesses and be human resource managers of tomorrow, if you notice that somebody is struggling with their ability to handle things, you as a person can give them additional challenges to build their confidence over time and include them, and be able to understand and be a bit understanding. So, in summary, I want you to pay attention to a number of things. Now, on the slide before, I want you to know that you would have seen developing an internal locus of control. Please review what that is, and also review number 9, which is avoid surface analysis of oneself. All right, so again, we define self-concept, and your book does that. There are 4 parts of self-concept which you're asked to fill out. Psychologist Carl Rogers has a number of things to say. I want you to note what he did and fill in the slides. There are a number of facts about self-esteem that we would have gone over. We talked about positive regard, unconditional, and conditional as relates to parents and the early persons in our lives, whether they are grandparents or guardians, and also strategies for success when you have to deal with yourself and to deal with others.